And thank you very much. I'd like to invite our last speaker, Director General of NHK Kobe, who has been an European correspondent for many years, Mr. Yasuhiro Nagasaki. He's going to talk about current world affairs perspectives of an international correspondent. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for the introduction. My name is Nagasaki. Our program at NHK is Yai no Sakura, which is very popular, and we are happy to come here. I am stationed in Kobe at the moment. Until a few years ago, I was in Europe. I have spent many years in Europe, and I was requested to speak to you about my experience. I understand that some of the students here, because of the globalization, are to encounter various values. Although my experience is not diverse, I'd like to share with you my own view of how we should look at the world from different perspectives. The term globalization has become very popular and being used quite often. What do you think is the image of the term globalization? You would have a lower barriers in terms of borders, and you have a free movement of people and goods. And information also flows rapidly because of the advancement of technology, which lead to diversity of people's perspectives. And that, I think, is what we mean by globalization. But actually, in my own experience, in the era of so-called globalization, when you have major international topics and news, it seems to me that once a certain perspective is established, any other ways of looking at things don't emerge. Because we're talking about globalization, I would say that you should provide different perspectives, but particularly in mass media, once a certain angle is offered, different ways of looking at things do not seem to come up. You may be using Twitter, so Facebook, information flows back and forth, and you would think that that will enhance different perspectives, but that may not be actually the case. It's rather difficult to pinpoint the reason why that is the case. But through my own experience, what I can say is that I was in Europe from 2007. There was a Lehman shock, and up until now, economy is facing many difficulties. At long last, here in Japan, there is some positive perspectives for economy to improve. In those days, I was in Paris, and there was this financial crisis and euro crisis occurred. Many issues surrounding euro surfaced. Furthermore, many countries, so-called euro countries, have suffered. This is the map of Europe, and what the English related English language mass media really is the mainstream at the moment. Some people talk about the end of euro, the end of EU experiment. That often was the article. And
そういうつまり我々は外にいてヨーロッパ大陸か
we
ら
were outside
ヨーロッ
of
パ
the
の情報を
continent,
一生懸命
but we were
調べて
trying
集めてこういう
to
のを他の記者が出し
collect
てるんですけれども
information and
東京か
disseminate
ら高速から
information
戻ってくるその日本でどう伝えるかあるいはその我々
to
の視聴した
Japan.
大きな参考にする、
And
英語圏のメディアに
the
伝え
English
方という
language
のと
media
私たちヨーロッパ大陸に住んでる
was
私はパ
there,
リにいたんですけ
and
れど
I was
も
stationed in
そこで
Paris.
感じている、日本人同僚
And the
の
perspectives
感じ
and
方にものすごく
what we
逆らって厳
feel
しいんですね。で
in
こういう経
Paris
験がありまし
and
た。
my
ある
perspectives
の
of
は、
the Japanese
記者の集まりで、あ
colleagues
る
were
よ
different.
その他の社の記者がいるんですけれども、
One of the
これは
correspondents
いろい
from
ろ
other companies
そ
said
の
that
も
Tokyo
ちろん今のその経済
is
ユーロの問題とかヨーロッパの将来についていろいろな諸問題があるということは
such
もちろん認めるけれども、
a
だから
difficulty.
といって
We
そ
do
の
acknowledge
ユーロ
that
が
euro
将来絶対
does
ないと
have problems,
言
but
え
that
るかもし
doesn't
れない。
mean
そ
that
の点に関して
euro
はちょうどいい加
is
減
the
両
end of
方
the
ともいろ
world
いろ
and no
ニュースデスク
future.
が
But it
手を入れ
seems
て最
like
終
the
的な認識を
Tokyo
欲しい地域にな
news
ると
desk,
そう
when
いう
they
ニュアンスも
intervene,
嫌われてしまう
any
そういう話をし
articles
たんですね。
have that
そしたら他の
tone
記者
of the
も
end of
そうだ
the
そうだそれで
euro.
賛成だ
And
と
other
い
journalists
う
all
こと
said
になっ
that
たんです。でも
that
ち
was
ろん
the
今
case.
日お話しいただきました松本さんそ
Of
れか
course,
ら石谷
Mr.
香織さん
Matsumoto
という
and
記者も
Mr. Kato,
大先輩ですけれど
they
も、
are
外に
very
行ったことな
senior
い
to
ような
me
記者
as
たち
a
が
journalist,
共にして自分の
and
中から
many of the
答弁を
correspondents
伺
and
いそれを
journalists
東京の演出で
outside
す
of
から
Tokyo,
聞るわけですけれど
when they
も、
send
それ
their
が変えられ
articles,
たとか
the
短く
desk
なったというのも多いんで
will
すけど、
edit, and
まあ
we
そう
all
いう経験はあり
complain
ますけれ
that
ど、
there was
私
a
の持って
major
る経
change
験
or
は
there was a
それとはちょっ
shortening.
と違って、
But
根本的
that's
にその
not
ニュアンス
what
が
the
変わってくるということでどうなの
European
かなというそう
journalists
いう気
were
が
saying
しま
that
した。
there is a complete
でそ
change
の
of
まあ
the
一つには
nuance
先ほど出ましたけれど
that
も、
we write.
なんて言うんでしょうか、この場合のこのヨーロッパというのは、私の申し上げているのは、
What I'm
そのイ
trying
ギリ
to
ス
say
を
is
除いた
that
ヨーロッパ大
except
陸のこと
UK,
なんで
we
す
are
けれど
talking
も、
about the European continent.
ちょっとこれを見ていただくと、
And
これ
here,
は EU ですね、ヨーロッ
this
パ、
is
まあ、これが
EU.
細かいことはどうでもいいんですけれど
I'm
も、
not going into details, but
右側はユーロに入ってい
on
る
the
と
right
いう国、それから
shows
左側は、
Eurozone, and on the left,
これはまあ、ここは例えばスイスで EU に入
here
っている
Switzerland
ような
is
話が
not
ありますけど、こ
in
れ
Eurozone, and
EU のね。
these are
で、これ
Islamic
は、
countries. These are
例えばユーロ、この青いところが
the
使っていて、
blue
使っていない。これは
is
まあ、
the
この台が見
Eurozone,
てますか、使っていないと
and
ころがあり
here
ます。
they don't use euro.
まあ、私の場合は要するにこちら側に住んでいるわけ
I
ですね。
lived on
この
this
赤の
part of
印
the
なん
map
ですけれど
with
も、
my
まあ、市
colleagues.
場その5億人ぐらいの大きい市場があって、
500 million was
そ
the
こに入っ
size
てい
of
くのが使ってい
market.
ると。でもちろんその通貨そのものにもいろんな問題があるんだけれ
And
ど
of course, the
も、現
currency
実に我々
itself
が使ってい
has
るのにどうしてそんな
challenges and
に
problems,
そ
but
のダメなんだというような言い方が広がるのかな
the
と、そういう
question
不思議
was
な感じがしたん
why
です
was
けれど
it
も、
that people often
例えば
talk
これは
about something pessimistic and negative
当
about
時
this
仲間も話
euro?
したことなんですけれども、
And
ま
what
あ
we were
東京
talking
でいろいろ
amongst
なその有識法人レベルの
ourselves
中
was
で
that
は、
those
経済
in
が専門になりま
Tokyo
すし、ある
who
いは
decide on
ど
the
ちらかという
policy of
と、
how
レベルといい
we
ますか、例えばロンドンの
report,
時代史、ニュ
they
ーヨークの株式
are
と企業時代
experts
史、
of
そしてワ
economy,
シントンで
and
アメリカの
some
連邦
people
政
were
府、
in
日本
London,
中に
some
専門
people
に
were
近
in
いことを
city, and
聞かれ
some
ました。
people were
そういうことで、もちろんそ
also
れ
at
は世界
FRB
の
in
大
United
きな流れを
States.
作ってはいるんですけれど
And of
も、
course, these places
やや
do
もする
form the
と、
major
そういう見方、定定的な見
flow,
方、
but
英語メディアといいますか、そういう見
the
方
English
がもち
American
ろんいろん
way
なところに
of
配布され
looking at
て、
things
そういう感じでいろ
seem
んなも
to
の
be
が、
dominant.
まあ、時として、
And
伝わるということで、
that's how all
大
the
きな乖離
articles
が、
are being
例えばヨー
reported.
ロッパ大陸に住んでいる日本人の我々の記者
For
と
the
東
Japanese
京で
journalists
ものを
living
見て
in
い
a
る、
European
その編集
continent
担当が
and
それぞれ
the
伝わって
head
い
of
るんじゃないか、
the
そういう気が
editing
し
bureau
まし
in
た。
Tokyo
で、
have different
まあ、もちろ
perspectives.
ん例え
So
ばこのユーロ
as
の
they
通
are
貨の
more
話
influenced
ってい
by
うのは、まあ、経済
UK
の問題なん
and
ですけれども、
America.
まあ、例えばですね、そのいろいろ取材して調べていって、びっくりしたと言いますか、歴史の話になりますけれど
One
も、
other thing about
この中にそ
our
の
own
松先生が話
experience
した
is
社会
that
制度ですが、
I do
ヨ
not
ーロ
need to
ズの
explain
それ
this
から
in
フランスですけれども、あ
details,
る学
but we
者
have
が
experts, professors here, but
この金過去400年ぐらいの間に
and
何回戦争したのか
when there was a question about how many wars they had in the past 400 years,
27回大きい戦争をしてるんです。
they had 27 major wars that they fought
第二次世界大戦、
on the European continent,
それから
including
ロ
the
シアと
First World
の
War,
危機戦
the
争があ
Second
りまし
World
た。
War, and
まあそれはほとんどその
war
欧
with
核軍
Russia.
力の総合をかけた戦争の
So
27
they
回だっ
were
たんですね。
all
まあ、そういう
wars
例えばその
based on the
今ヨーロッ
survival
パ
of the
のイギ
state
リスと
and the
か EU
people.
の中心メンバー、特に今ドイツの
The
力
major
とかいろいろ
players of
いろんな
Euro,
問題はありますけれども、
which
ドイツ
include
とフランスと
French
いう
and
のの
German,
権威者でありますけれども、
they
そういう国
are the
が
leading
過
force
去
in
6年
Eurozone.
間27
And
回
these
戦争をしている。
countries had
そ
27
の挙句にヨ
wars
ーロッ
that
パ
they
で、
fought
まあ、
in the
日本は
past
戦争戦
400
場に
years.
ヨーロッパをするのはおらしいということで、そういういろんなこ
And
と
because
を
they
考
do not
えた
want to
中で
repeat this
追加のユーロ
experience,
が出てきたと。
they came up
で
with this
まあ、いわ
system of
ば
euro.
コインの盗撮がありますけれど
You
も、
have
まあ、ある人の言い
coins
方で
and
は、
bills, and some
片方の
people
面はも
say
ちろん
that
経済の問題が語
one
られるけど、
side
そのコイ
talks
ンの反
about
対側に
economy,
は
but the
戦
other
争と
side
平
of
和
the
が語られて
coin
いる、そういう
it
問題な
talks
んです。
about
で
the warfare
ドイ
in
ツ
the
が独立した
past.
時の
When
首
two
相だったヘル
Germanies
ムト・コール
were
氏はですね、
united,
まあ、ユーロ
Mr.
とはつまるとこ
Helmut
ろ、戦
Kohl,
争と平和の
the
問題だという
chancellor,
ふうに、
said
ま
that
あ、
euro
旗しているといいますか、
really
つ
is
まりその通貨
the
が平和の安全保障
consequence
装置
of
だ
the
という言い
war,
方もしているわけで
the
す。
currency
つま
being
りそ
the safety
のもちろ
mechanism
ん私がその、
for
ユー
peace.
ロに何にも問題はないということを言うつも
I'm
りは
not
ありま
trying
せ
to
ん
say
し、
that we
そ
have
の
no
例えば
problem with euro at the
経済
moment.
の観点から言いますと、
From an economic
通貨の問
perspective,
題で、例えばその財政政策と金融政策が
when it
一
comes
致しない
to
とか、さまざまなそ
financial
の問題があるんですけれども、そうし
policy,
た
it
経済の
doesn't
側面か
meet
ら見ると、
with the
いろ
fiscal
いろな問題
policy.
があるわけ
So
です。
from
で
that
もしかし、
perspective, of course,
現実に
euro
多
does
くの
face
機械の人が
issues
使
and
い、
problems,
それ
but
がその
in
戦
reality,
争と平和とそ
500 million
の
people
流
use
れ的
this
にもまたその歴史的な
currency,
原因の
and
過程に
this
生まれてきたと
was
考え
established
る
as a
と、そう
result
簡単
of
にで
so
すね、
many warfares
ユ
in
ー
the
ロの将来
past
が
with much
ダメだ
history
とか
behind.
いうのにもう
So
終わ
we
りだと
cannot
か、そ
just
ういうそ
really
の断
say
言する
that
否定
there's
的
no
な
future
言い
for
方っていう
euro,
のはなかなかできないんじゃないか
that
なと
the
いう
power is
気が
lost. We
するわ
cannot
けで
just
す。
come to that very short
で、
conclusion.
まあ、そのちょっとあんまり練れてない日本語で恐縮ですけれども、
I'm sorry that
一
this
つ、
phrase
こ
is
れから
not a
大き
well
な
thought
世界
statement,
の方々皆さん、
but
いろいろなその大きい現象に対応しな
for
ければ
those
ならな
of
いんです
you
けど、
who are going
例
to
えば
the
国際
world,
ニュースとか、それから
when you
国際
look
的
at
な現象
international
を
news or
見る
international
ときに、
phenomena,
一つの流れがこっちの方だ、
if
非常に大きい流れが
there's a
あって、それに
major
対してのお話があまり
direction
出
that,
てこないような、そう
and
いう
if
状
there's
況に
no
もし
reporting
ぶ
of
つかったときはですね、
other
ある
aspects and
と、
other trend,
他の見方もあるんじゃないか
if
と。
there's
今
just
こう
one
皆さんが
dominating
こっちの方
force
だ、こ
that
っちの
is
方だってい
being
うような
looked
ことを
into,
本当に違う考え方じゃ
please
ない
make
のかな
sure
と。
that
それ
you would
は
take an
まず一つ
attitude
ね、
of wait and
今
see
出ている状
for
況を絶対化してい
to
くん
look
ではな
for
く、その
other
しかたとか、
perspectives,
相対化してい
please
くと、
step back
言ってみればその一つの
to
見方ではなく、
take a more
他の見地か
comprehensive
ら
view and to
見ていく
take
方法が
a
ないの
view
かなと
from
い
a
うこと
different
を、
perspective and
そうな
different
ってくると
angle.
いうことはいいんじゃないのかな、
That I
そういう
think
気がい
is
たします。
advisable.
それがまず、一つ、
That's the
申
point,
し上げたい
first
こと
point.
なんですね。で、次に一つの例を紹介します
Another
けれど
example
も、
is
我
that
々はですね、やっぱりその世界情勢を見るとき、
if you look
どう
at
しても
what's
その
happening in the
大きい
world,
プレーヤー、大
we
国的な
tend
も
to
のを
focus
見る
on
わけですね。
larger
まあ、もちろ
nations
ん
and
我
larger
々、
players.
アジアについて言えば、中
That's
国
United
非常に大きな
States.
国
In
ですけれど
Asia,
も、
China is a
だ
major
とする
power.
と、そういう大きい国を振る舞い、
We
あるいは
tend
大きい
to
国が下す
focus
動
on
き
the
をしたという
behaviors
ふう
of
に言います。
larger
それ
powers
を
and
見
the
ていれば、
political
安全性があると
consequences
流
that
れ
they
が分
bring
かる
about.
というふうに思い
They
ます。もち
think
ろん私
that
は
we can
言う
better
ことはそんなに
understand the
大事じゃない
world
ということでは、
from
そんな
that
大きな流れを
perspective.
作
Of
ること
course, I
は
don't
非
deny
常に大
that.
事なんですけれ
It's
ども、
important that you
ただ
know
それ以
what's
外のそ
happening
の今申し上げたような
from
違
the
う見
major
方ではないの
forces,
か、ある
but
い
you
は
should also look for
もっと
other
小さい、い
angles.
わゆるプレイヤーに
You should
その
also pay
大きい
attention
国と物
to
事をしたという
minor
ふうに、
players that may
そういう
give
こと
you a
を申し上
different
げたいんです
perspective.
ね。で、今回はですね、 今ここに出てる、フィンランドという国をちょっと
So I'd like to talk about Finland.
ここですね。
It's here.
国としてはですね、場所も皆さんよくご存知かもしれません。
I think you know it very well where it is located.
今のロシアかつてのソ連です。
This is Russia, USSR.
いいんです。
It is the
今
northern
になり
part.
ますと、最近はいろんな国際的なその調査とか指標で、
According to international survey or indicator, they are number one in terms of competitiveness. They are also one of the leading countries in terms of technology related efforts. We have one of the panelists from Finland. It has a population of 5 million, but it is known for its good social welfare and education. Because there are many books on education, I'm not going to talk about education as you can read them. I'd like to explain or think about the reason why they have such a good education. It's just my personal view based on my experience there as a journalist. So we need to look at the history of the country. You may have been there. This is an old photo I took. This is the cathedral downtown and the statues.
So this shows the history of this country, Finland. It's up in the north, so of course it's so cold in the winter. For many years, Finland was placed under very difficult historical conditions. For almost 5 years, it was occupied by Sweden, and it became independent in 1917. But then they had a difficult time period vis-à-vis Soviet Union. And after the end of World War II, during the Cold War period, especially in relationship with the Soviet Union, Finland had to spend a lot of its energy, time, and labor. When you think of Nordic countries, they are associated with high welfare state. Although the taxes are very high, they enjoy a high state of welfare, and more or less Finland seems to be the same with Sweden or Norway. But their policies for domestic and international relationship may differ. Sweden was taking neutrality, and Denmark and Finland had different policies. But because of the relationship with the Soviet Union, Finland had to conclude a friendship agreement with USSR. In the case of any emergency, Finland was required to take side with the Soviet Union under that agreement. But in early days of Cold War, Poland and other countries became satellite countries of the Soviet Union. But Finland continued to preserve its democracy. And of course, that is still upheld today. So Finland has faced with such difficult time periods so many times in its history. After the end of World War II, there were two important political figures of the country. This person is well known among the Finns, and this is the president, Paasikivi, and perhaps not many Japanese people know of this politician. For about 10 years, back in those days, Finland had territorial disputes with the Soviet Union, and Finland had to fight with the Axis countries. But after the war, Finland had virtually no assistance or help of friends from the Western countries, but vis-à-vis Stalin, Finland had to go through so many difficult negotiations vis-à-vis the Soviet Union to keep its independence, and he played a very important role in the difficult times. And President Paasikivi once said that all wiseness starts from the acceptance and recognition of the reality. In negotiating with a big power like the Soviet Union first, the Finland had to accept the reality. So his diplomacy was based upon the recognition and acceptance of reality and realism. And the successor to him as the president was the President Kekkonen. For 26 years, he presided over the country as the president. Of course, he was put in the position through an election and through ingenuity and wisdom. Those two great political figures steered the course of the country. And then the Soviet Union collapsed in 1989 with the collapse of the Berlin Wall. And so the previous agreements with the Soviet Union disappeared, and there are 1,000 kilometers of distance between Finland and the Soviet Union. And Finland, it was more or less clear that the successor to the Soviet Union will not oppose to Finland in any vicious manner, but still it was considered very important for Finland to keep a good relationship with its neighbor. But during the Cold War period, in terms of economy, Finland was able to receive a supply of oil from the Soviet Union at a cheap cost. There was a kind of mutual interdependence between Finland and the Soviet Union in Cold War. But after the end of Cold War, under the market principles and market economy, now there was a competition between the Finnish products and the products from the Western countries. As a result, a big unemployment rate, like 20% unemployment, and the collapse of big firms and banks took place in Finland. But then Finland decided to examine its education system and looked at the strategic growth industries such as information and communication technologies. They went through such a thorough review of the national strategies. You know a very well-known communications company, Nokia. During the Cold War, Nokia was producing tires. Was not a spectacular company, but Nokia decided to focus upon the communications technologies, and it became such a global player. A lot of reforms took place in Finland, and of course, experts point out that there were already very good points about education system in Finland, but in a sense. Finland was able to steer the course of diplomatic negotiations quite well vis-à-vis a big player like the Soviet Union, and they had virtually no assistance from any other countries. And after the end of Cold War, Finland once again had to depend upon its own people for steering the course of the future development. The percentage of employment in information technology, communications increased, and Finland became a member of EU. And now a member of Eurozone. What I want to say is we have to look at the major trends created mainly by big players in the world, but on the other hand, we have to check different perspectives on the world picture. It could be Finland, or it could be Poland, or a former Yugoslavia, such as Slovenia, or small countries in the Balkans. When those small countries have to decide a life or death policies and decision making require deep insight into a tough-mindedness. Of course, when big countries change their policies, that has a major impact on other countries. But on the other hand, the actions and the thinking on the part of small countries are also very important. Japan is now faced with a series of challenges, and Japan may be able to find a good hint from the history and experience of small countries in the
で、
world.
その大国的なそのものの見方といいますか、
So,
違った視点を持つっていうこ
big
との大切さを
countries' point of view
かなり
is of course important,
申し訳
but
ない
as I
という
mentioned, we
ました
need
けれど
to
も、
also
最後に少し日本に関わる
learn
こと
to
で申
look
し上げ
at
ますと、
the trends
例え
and
ば今アジアで
what
見る
is
と
taking place in the
日中
world
関係
from
と
a
か
diverse
南米同
perspectives.
士関係とか、
Now, if you
ま
look
あ、週
at
刊誌なんか
here
見
in
出しながら
Japan,
ですね、
for instance,
実は戦
Japan's
争だと
relationship
そういう
with
こと
China is
もある
becoming
わけ
so
です。
sore, and
もちろ
some
ん
say
非常
even
に関係がいいという
that
ことはこれ
there
事実で
might
すけれ
be
ども、どうもそ
confrontation
の
at any
向
time
こう
between
側
the
から
two
見れば悪
countries,
と言います
although
か、
this is an exaggeration.
2つの文じゃないんだと
But
いうふうになるわけです。あるい
when
は
we look
絶
at
対に2つの国が
the relationship between the two
仲
countries,
仲良
we
くなけれ
tend
ば
to
ならないと、そういう上で
think
あまり家
that
族にこだ
the
わらず
two
ですね、
countries have to be
日本
always
の
on good
も
terms
の
with
を
each
気に入
other,
っていかなかっ
have
た
to
り、
be good friends
そ
with
ういう
each
気が
other
します。
all the
特
time.
に
But this may be rather
ヨーロッ
misleading.
パみたいにですね、
For
狭い地域に
instance,
たく
in
さんの
Europe,
国があります。例えばその
space-wise,
い
it's
ろいろ
not
と
a
離れ
very
た地
big
点があって、
area, but there are
大
so
体
many
隣の国
countries
々
put
があんま
together
り仲良
in
く
Europe,
ないんです
and
ね。
usually the
戦
neighboring
争が
two
もちろん絶
countries
対あ
are
るし、
not on
今の
good
ヨーロッパ
terms
で
with
も
each
戦争
other.
してる国もあるわけで
Of
す。
course,
そのこと
such
と比べ
countries
さ
are
せるよう
not
な
in a
話がいっ
state of
ぱいあ
war,
ります。例えば、
but there are so many examples of
よく
two
オランダと
adjacent
ベルギーが
countries
やったりしま
not
した。
on very good terms with each other.
ブリュッセルに行った時に、
For
い
instance,
た
when
オ
I
ランダ
went to
と
Brussels,
それから、ベルギーの間、お互いをこう
between
蔑
the
視
Holland
と
and
話してたんです
Belgium,
けども、
there were
オランダ人
interesting jokes about each other. A Dutch said,
世界で一番薄い本をあなた
"The
ご存知です
thinnest
か？
book in the world, do you know what it
ね、そうす
is?"
ると答えは、知って
And
ます。
the answer
それは
is,
ベルギーの歴史の本です。
yes, it's a history book
つ
of
まりその
Belgium.
言いたいことってのは要するに
So
歴史が
what
短
a
い、
Dutch
そ
wants
れを
to
言いなが
say
ら
is
オランダ
that
に嫌われている、そういうこと
Belgium
なんですね。
has a
それから
much
もう一
shorter
つ、
history in
今度は
comparison to Dutch history.
ベルギー人がオランダ
And
人を、
Belgium
まあ、皮肉るというふうな
makes
話な
fun
んで
of
す。
Dutch by saying
オ
the
ランダのパ
following
ブに、
joke.
オランダ人3人が来ました。
There were three
それで
Dutch
賭けをし
in
よう
a
ということになり、
pub
つまり、
in the
その
Netherlands
お
and
客さんの
decided
3
to
人の前
make
に、
a bet.
洗面器が置かれて手が
A
入れました。それ
a
で、
bowl
じゃあここで
with
賭ける
water
人
was placed in
火を
front of the three
顔をつけ
Dutch
て、一番長い
gentlemen,
こと息を吹き
and
かけ
the
てる
one
人
who was able
に
to
みんな
put
で
his face
火
into
を放られる。
a
そういう賭けをした。
bowl full of
で、
water
結果はど
and
うなり
was
ました
able
か？
to stay
3
their
人とも
face
死にました。
within the water the
つまり
longest
それは、
would
ベ
win.
ルギー
And
人からする
actually,
と、オラ
the
ンダ人
answer
が
is
たった
that
一
all
杯
three
のビール
Dutch
を
people
ただ飲
died.
みたいがために、
Well, just one
できるだけ
those
息を
Dutch people who
最
want
終
to
的に
get
は
a
失速して
free
しまう。
drink of
そういう
beer
ことなんです。
make
まあ、どこぞ
such
最後の
a
方に
foolish
何かお互い結
bet
構そ
and
の皮
then
肉った
die.
り批判
And
したり、
so
まあ、それは彼
there
女
are
我
such
々たちが
interesting
一番
jokes
わかっている。
about each other,
それから例えばポーラン
and
ド
it
と
is
ドイ
more or
ツみ
less
たいに
natural because
特
they
にオラン
had
ダは
such a
ドイツと
bitter
知り合いされたわけです
history
け
of
れど
war,
も、例
and
えばその
Poland
ドイ
was
ツ語の表
invaded
現の中
by
に
Germans, and a
ポ
German
ーリッシュフュー
expression
チャー、つまりそ
goes
れはポーラン
like
ド経
this:
済という単語があるんですけど
a
も、これは要
Polish
するに
economy
ドイツ側がドイツ語で、つまりそのポーランド人が
in
ドイツ人の組織力がない、あるいは何を頼んでもうまくいかないというそういうことを皮肉って、
means that the Polish economy is always disorganized, and Polish economy therefore has such a negative connotation when it
私が
comes
教え
to
たいのは、
a
どうも
German
その2つの
expression.
友好関
But
係
the
という
same
のは、
goes
そも
for
そも
Polish
本当に
making
今、
jokes
ずっ
of
と仲良く
Germans.
なる
And
そう
so
いうつもりでは決して
the
ない
two
ので、
adjacent countries
むしろ
cannot be natural
大
friends with
体
each
隣
other
としては、
if
大体
no
基
efforts are
本的には
made.
冷静な見方をす
Rather,
る
we
べき
should
です。
take a more
うまくいかないということを認
objective
識
point
して
of
いた
view
ら、なかな
that
か
usually
交易を
we
しない
cannot
という
make good friends with
どうやっ
a
たら仲良く
neighboring country if we do not make any
むしろ
efforts.
そういう
And
発
that
想
is the
は
reason
必要な
why
んで
we
はない
have
か。
to
要するにお
use
互
our
いに気にな
genius
ること
and
をそれを
thinking
しないということが、
capabilities to
これは
consider
も
what
う、
we
その
should
コス
do
ト、
or
それが
can
プロ
do
セスで、必
to
ずそれは
uh,
最終的にはぶつかること
stay
にな
on
る
good
わけです。
terms with a neighboring country.
大体その
Otherwise,
大変なこと
we would move ahead toward a collegium course. there is no solution I can present to such a relationship between the two adjacent countries. But as I mentioned, perhaps it is more productive to think that it is only natural that the two neighboring countries do not go along with each other. Therefore, we have to think about the ways to be with good friend with each other. well, some people say that there was a history of 1,000 war in Europe, and in such a continent, efforts are made to create our peaceful society. Of course, the history here in Japan and Asia differs, but when we look at the bilateral relationship, perhaps we should take a rather objective and cool minded way of thinking. And so when we think and view a bilateral relationship with any country, such a point of view is also quite helpful. Now, um, different cultures, different societal backgrounds, perhaps those students in the GRM program would have difficult experiences. But I would like to advise you that you will not be too much influenced by one prevailing idea. Rather, you should stop and think to see if there are any other perspectives you might want to take into consideration. And as I mentioned, for a bilateral relationship, usually the relationship between the two is not so good. So what we need to think is to consider ways to improve the relationship between the two countries as much as possible. Goethe, a German novelist, once said that those who do not know a foreign language know their own languages. It therefore implies that those who do not know other cultures would not know their own culture, and those who do not understand other perspectives would not understand their own perspectives. So we need to learn to form a habit of trying to have multiple perspectives on any issue for challenge. Thank you very much. Thank you very much